Thank you, everybody, very much for agreeing to be on this. I appreciate everybody's time, and I know a few of you have been on a bunch of stakeholder groups recently, and here's one more that'll be just as fun. So this is a great topic we're talking about this morning. We were going to do a hybrid model of having kind of part in person, part teams, but just with everything going on, the variant and everything, we figured it would be just as convenient and safe for everyone to be on the Teams format. So what we're going to do today is Dawn's going to go through some ground rules in the agenda and the history of the process. And then I'll go through some expectations and kind of go over some things to set the what we're going to be talking about. And just if you could stay on mute when you're not speaking, and a big thing is be respectful. This is a great group. We're all on the same team, and we're coming into this looking for ideas. We've been tasked by the ACF Legislative Committee to come up with a report for them in this upcoming session. And so you all have you are all invited because you have a background and expertise in certain areas, and really please participate. Don't be shy. We need all your input. And again, thank you very much for being on. We will have, for folks, observers, we will have an area around 11:30 for public comment. So we welcome public comment. And as we go along, if you can think of other kind of experts that you would like to speak on a certain area, suggest that, and we can try to get that person on. So again, thank you. Any questions, please? I think we'll go by raising the hand. And we just want to make sure everybody shares in the space for speaking. And Dawn, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. I know that most of us know each other, but I'd like to start just with brief introductions. Just say who you are and what you do, 5-10 seconds. I'll start with Patty.
Sure. Patty Cormier, Director of Maine Forest Service.
Okay. Paul Larrabee.
Hi, everybody. Paul Larrabee, Consulting Forester, Landowner.
Greg Foster.
Greg Foster, I'm also Consulting Forester, not living far from Paul.
Pat Royce.
Pat Royce, Director for the SFI Implementation Committee here in Maine.
Bob and Mary Burr.
Bob and Mary Burr, live in Mercer, private landowners.
Mary Burr, owner of Blue Ribbon Farm.
Tom Doak.
Hi, Tom Doak. I'm the Executive Director of Maine Wood Landowners.
Nathan Wadsworth.
Good morning, Nate Wadsworth, 4-term state representative from Southern Oxford County, and I co-own Wadsworth Woodlands with my father, Jack.
Kate Dufour.
I'm Kate Dufour. I'm the Director of Advocacy for the Maine Municipal Association, and I'm just filling in for Rebecca Graham.
Dana Duran.
Dana Duran, PLC of Maine.
Nancy Sfera.
Nancy Sfera, I'm the Director of Land Management for the Nature Conservancy in Maine.
Heather Spalding.
Hello, everyone. I'm Heather Spalding, and I'm Deputy Director of Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association.
Mike St. Peter.
Mike St. Peter, Certified Logging Professional Program.
Did I miss anybody? who's a member of the group? Okay, Pat Strauch is still trying to get on apparently. I'm Don Mancius. I'm Director of Forest Policy and Management for the Maine Forest Service. And I'm probably going to turn off my camera at some point because I'm going to be taking notes and just keeping an eye on things in the background for Patty. But first wanted to go over some ground rules, which I sent out to you folks early on. Just for going forward, as Patty mentioned, we'd like everybody to show mutual respect, courtesy, and patience. Communicate respectfully with folks. Our time is limited. We've got about 3 hours for the meeting. There are over a dozen people on the call, so divide your time accordingly. Spend most of your time active listening. We'd like to debate the issues and not the people. Refrain from interrupting. We'll do our best to manage this with the hands up function. We've got a break set for around 10:25, just a 10-minute stretch break. Some of these other ground rules I use for in-person meetings. Anyway, we will try to use appropriate problem-solving techniques if we encounter problems. Where we are trying to reach a decision on something, we'll try to attain consensus. But if the group feels we spent enough time on an issue and we need to move on, we're going to move on. And we will document reasons for any unresolved issues. I'd like to welcome Pat Strauch to the meeting. Pat, if you could just say briefly who you are. Oh, I think we lost him again. Oh, there he is. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, sorry. I'm back at work, but my computer wasn't, so I. Few
Okay.
glitches.
So, Pat, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Pat Strauch, Maine Forest Products Council Executive Director.
Thank you. Any questions on the ground rules before we move on to a brief history? Okay. I'm just going to walk through a few remarks that I had about the history of how we got to where we are today. The law regarding the process for adoption of municipal forestry ordinances was enacted in 1999 as part of the reform of the Forest Practices Act. As some of you recall, we went through a rather painful period in the late 1990s, mid to late 1990s, regarding forest practices, a lot of legislation, and this was one of the outcomes. Things around municipal ordinances were pretty quiet for a long time, but several years ago, we started to get calls, mostly from consulting foresters, about towns that had enacted or were in the process of enacting local forestry ordinances. When we did find out about these issues, and we would reach out to the towns. In some cases, after beginning the process, the town would decide that they didn't need to pursue a local ordinance, and in other cases, they would follow the process and enact their ordinances. But as we began to dig deeper, we learned of towns that had enacted ordinances which regulated forestry operations, often through reduced clearing sizes or percentage removal limits, but also through other methods such as requiring permits for timber harvesting, setback requirements, road permits, and so on. We had conversations over the years with groups like Maine Woodland Owners, and before last session, they worked with Senator Black to see if he would be willing to introduce right to practice forestry legislation, and he was. Senator Black's bill contained two key provisions. One, the protection of forestry operations against nuisance suits, and two, would disallow towns from regulating forestry operations if they adhered to generally accepted forestry practices, which would be identified through rulemaking. The hearing before the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee was interesting, contentious, you might say. 6 people spoke in favor, 16 people spoke in opposition, and 1 person spoke neither for nor against. 8 people testifying mentioned at some point concerns about pesticides used in forestry operations. After the hearing, we developed an amendment to the original bill based on right to practice forestry laws in Vermont and South Carolina. The amendment that we had proposed contained a purpose statement, defined forestry operations to exclude applications of pesticides and fertilizers, so that was off the table. Allowed a rebuttable presumption in nuisance suits for negligent actions, violations of law, and clear and convincing evidence of harm. Prohibited local regulation of forestry operations conducted on land enrolled in current use taxation, had a forest management plan subject to a conservation easement and/or complying with all best management practices and laws, and allowed a 5-year look back for local regulations to apply if a change of land use occurred. The committee did not consider the amendment and instead enacted the resolve, which brings us together today. As we go forward, we just would like you to consider a couple of other things. One, the regulation of pesticides is not in the Maine Forest Service's wheelhouse. That's under the control of the Board of Pesticide Control, and we do not intend to address the application of pesticides or fertilizers through this process. And while this process may result in recommendations to change the existing law regarding municipal forestry ordinances, and this is the first order of business for this process, we also expect to address other issues of concern regarding forestry regulation. Patty.
Thanks, Don. So Dawn sent around a few documents, and one of them was the actual resolve that came out of the committee. And just so we're on common ground, I'm just going to read it out. Just read it out loud, just so we're on the same page and starting from the same place. So the resolve regarding authority of municipalities to regulate timber harvesting. Section 1, stakeholder group regarding authority of municipalities to regulate timber harvesting, resolved that the director of the Maine Forest Service within the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry shall convene a group of stakeholders, including but not limited to organizations representing municipalities, family woodland owners, logging contractors, farmers, outdoor recreation and environmental interests, and consulting foresters who work with multiple municipalities to review and assess the law in the Maine Revised Statutes, Title 12, Section 8869, subsection 8, and the corresponding process relating to a municipal proposal to adopt or amend a timber harvesting ordinance. The director shall report the findings and recommendations of the stakeholder group, including suggested legislation, to the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry by December 15th, 2021. The Joint Standing Committee may submit a bill to the 130th legislature relating to the subject matter of the report. So just wanted to say that so we're all on the same page. So we've heard the history. Our purpose is to come up for a direction for legislation. And I just wanted to back up a little bit about talking about the purpose, that where this is coming from with regards to us is that, a big concern of mine is that we're seeing a shift in the dynamics of woodland owners, and the pandemic certainly accelerated that a bit with you know, we're seeing urban and suburban residents move into rural areas. And they're realizing that the working landscape does not really conform to their images of what they want. Some adjust their expectations, but others turn to courts and local governments to impose their values on land uses. So in the late 70s and 80s, it was the family farm that was threatened, and state governments responded by enacting right to farm laws that protected farmers from nuisance lawsuits. So, you know, now it's the management options for forest landowners that are possibly being curtailed. We are certainly seeing more complaints. And I think many of you on this call have some probably personal stories about that. So right to practice forestry laws that address nuisance lawsuits provide a defense for forest landowners from a court finding that their activities are a nuisance. The laws do not prohibit the nuisance suits themselves. And there's many, as we go through this, there's different options. Dawn sent around the Maine Agriculture Protection Act. So many states, forestry is part of that Agriculture Act. So possibly that's an option to be suggesting. So I'm hoping you've got a chance to read through the materials that he sent along, and also the hearings, the legislative hearings, just to see, you know, what the views were and what the issues are as we go forward. So yes, are there any questions at this point?
Heather.
Thank you so much, Patty and Dawn. I really appreciate your convening the stakeholder group and all the work that went into sharing the materials. And I really appreciate the honor to the opportunity to participate. And I just wanted to say that, you know, Patty, you were saying it's very important for us to all be on the same page. And I guess I just wanted to note that I'm not sure what can be done when a resolve is written in a way that doesn't really reflect the motion from the work session and the vote. And so I feel that to really be on the same page, we have to be going into this with the same desired outcomes. And I think it was 3 outcomes that were on the document that you shared. And from my recollection, and I did listen to the end of the work session again, where the motion was put forward, Representative O'Neill was calling for, you know, the convening of a stakeholders group, and really, you know, the essence of that public hearing and the work sessions was that there was really good law already on the books, and that what really needed to happen was that we raised awareness, and we worked with Maine Municipal Association and others to raise awareness about the very important and challenging hurdles that municipalities had to go through to enact any ordinance. So from my perspective, I was hoping that, you know, we would learn from each other, and I am really interested to hear more examples of how these ordinances have been deemed a nuisance by consulting foresters or landowners. I don't think that you know, that question was posed to witnesses in the public hearing, and we didn't really hear much. It was like, well, maybe this could be a problem in the future. So I guess I'm just wondering, is it possible? I mean, I guess there is a may in that directive saying we may request legislation in the next session, but it's not that we absolutely have to go back with a recommendation. And so I just wondered if we could think about that as well, because that certainly was my perspective coming into the stakeholders group, that it's about raising awareness. It's not necessarily about dissecting the existing laws on the book. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. And, you know, and anything's possible here in this group. It's about us. That's the purpose, right? We're going to decide where we want to land on this. One thing that you brought up that I didn't mention was that Representative O'Neill strongly had, as part of this, suggested that it's about communications with municipalities. Is that what needs to be improved? Is that the route we take? And Dawn is going to go through section 12 to describe what the route is at this point. And then it's a matter of, you know, deciding based on Representative O'Neill's suggestion. Is there, and you're right, maybe legislation doesn't have to come out of this, but you know, that's what I'm looking to you guys for, I guess, today. So yeah, thank you. Any other your hand's still up, Heather, unless you have another question. Any other questions? And any input is welcome, absolutely. Okay, Tom?
Yeah.
So a couple of concerns that I have are, well, one is clearly the process isn't being followed. I'm not blaming municipalities, but there's no even central location. The statute requires a central location of all ordinances, and you haven't even been given them. So I'm guessing there's a whole bunch of ordinances that frankly were not legally adopted, but the only way a landowner can challenge it is to go to Superior Court. So probably got to fix some of that kind of stuff. But I guess one of the things I was thinking about, we've had really good success with statewide water quality standards, which takes some burden off the municipality. You know, I think it's been widely accepted within the municipalities as a way to take burden off them as well. And so the concept of something that, you know, standardizes procedures that let apply across a broad geographic area seem to make sense. And I am familiar with some of the ordinances that are in existence, and there's no science that it's hard to understand why in the world some of the language is there. And I was with the Forest Service when this law went into effect initially, and I did some of the town reviews, and my experience was usually it was some issue in the town something happened, and people reacted to, they didn't like a cutting, and all of a sudden there's a rule that doesn't make any sense and things like that. So I don't think our interest is not to you know, get away with anything here, but there are things that don't make sense. I think there might be an opportunity to help out the municipalities to get them away from having to do some of the things that they have to enforce, and that kind of thing. So I can tell you, I was talking to a forester yesterday that said the climate is changing. I mean, they've had this forester told me of two in the last week, 2 clients that had been getting threatening phone calls from people about the fact that they were harvesting their land. And so I'm a little nervous about where things are headed. And that's why we had an interest in this bill. It wasn't to undermine anything or lower standards or expectations, and actually it had nothing to do with, I also want to make it clear, our interest has nothing to do with herbicides and pesticides and all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to get that out.
Thanks, Tom.
Paul Larrabee.
Thank you, Don. Patty, I agree with Tom. Just for everybody's background, I spent 10 years with the Maine Forest Service, 6 of that as a regional enforcement coordinator. As a consulting forester, I can tell you that process under the forest practices is not followed in municipalities. Don, you know, I've worked with municipalities on ordinances, rewriting ordinances, fixing ordinances. They're random, and they are in reaction to a cut. And things are changing. you know, it's sad now that if I tell people I'm cutting trees to put in agricultural land, it's okay. But if I'm cutting trees to do a thinning, it's not okay. And that's not right. And I deal with municipalities. I have municipality clients, several. So what I'm looking for out of this process is, Patty, you and I have talked about it in the past. Not only is there the right to be able to practice good forestry in southern Maine at stake, but also an educational component that we're not bad people. We're not doing bad things. We're actually helping preserve land by managing it in the southern part of the state, which is, that concept is gone now. So I'd like that educational component to be a part of it as well. And basically that's then, if you go into a municipality in southern Maine without reading in their ordinances from front to back, and you're planning to cut wood in some areas, not just southern Maine, but other areas of Maine, if you haven't read their land use ordinance from front to cover, you could be violating it just by cutting wood. Example I use is by simply saying, depending on what zone you're working in, if timber harvesting is an allowed use or not. And in some municipalities, timber harvesting has been left off the list, but agriculture is on the list. So, I mean, by simply not having timber harvesting be allowed use, and you're in tree growth, you can't cut wood. It makes absolutely no sense. Look forward to working with everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Tom, your hand is still up. Greg Foster.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Paul has to say about dealing with towns and their ordinances. And I've had an experience where I'm on the Raymond Planning Board, and we had some ordinances that affected forestry. And for many years, I asked the chairman to address this because I asked them to undo it. A lot of the rules they had were simply duplications of the state law. Eventually, we were able to, I think there were 7 paragraphs, we eliminated 5. And I did this by myself, but it was difficult to get these people to understand that what they were doing was a duplication and not necessary. And some of the things were really detrimental to the ability of foresters and the landowners to manage their property. And one example of the rule that they had was you could only cut 70% of a stand in a 10-year period. There's no map of all the stands in the town, and who's going to try to pay to reconstruct a stand to decide whether 70% of the stand was cut, who was going to violate it. It made no sense to have that in the rules at all. But in this case, it would have been helpful for me if I had some backing from other foresters. I didn't ask for any help. I just did it on my own. But maybe looking at some of the existing rules, ordinances, and providing some advice of how to undo them. If you can get that kind of cooperation from a planning board or town fathers, that's something to consider. And that's it.
Thanks, Greg.
Yep.
Kate DeFore.
You're muted, Kate.
Completely unfamiliar with Microsoft Teams. I just want to underscore what Heather talked about. You know, before we start talking about evil municipalities and the misuse of ordinances, it'd be good to hear what elements of these ordinances are particularly frustrating. And if there's a common denominator there, maybe we can make that type of strategic surgical amendment to the state statutes rather than saying no more. And I think there's a really important point that many of you have already brought up with respect to communication and education. I mean, when the state planning office was dissolved, we were left on our own to handle all sorts of things. I mean, I'm on a different commission with Heather. You know, we're talking about housing, we're talking about land use, we're talking about everything. And there needs to be some level of state assistance and technical resources that are offered to municipalities so that we can have these conversations and develop ordinances that treat everybody fairly. Because when you think about a community, we represent everyone in that community and everybody has an interest, and we have to adopt ordinances that address those. There's a delicate balance that has to be achieved. So resources, communication, I think the process in state statute is well laid out. There are many hurdles, and if there's true and there is evidence that communities aren't abiding by it, we can help communicate that if you are interested in adopting this ordinance, here are the many, many steps you have to take. So that's where we want to identify the real problems and see what solutions can be offered rather than a repeal of this authority. Now, to the extent that the outcome is the repeal of local authority, I'm going to ask for something in return. To me, it's a takings. It's a taking of a community's ability to protect itself. And if we're going to lose that, we're going to expect the state to help us out. So if suddenly we can't regulate for environmental problems and the DEP comes down on us, we're going to expect the state to help us out, mitigate, because you've taken our authority to protect ourselves. If it comes to roads and logging trucks are, basically ruining our roads, well, we're going to expect DOT to come and maintain those roads because once again, you've taken away a tool that we have to protect our interests. The other noise complaints, maybe state police has to step in because again, we will have lost that ability to protect. So to the extent that you take away our ability to protect our taxpayers, our resources, we need something in return. So I would prefer a more strategic approach, identifying the real problems and developing solutions. But if this committee wants to go the ultimate repeal route, considerations have to be provided that communities are losing that opportunity to protect their resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Just a question for you, Kate. You said that there needs to be more resources for municipalities. So in what respect?
In all respects. I mean, it gets back to that foundation of what the state planning office was when it was there. I mean, if somebody could pick up the phone and call Dawn, for example, and say, hey, listen, we're thinking about developing an ordinance. What do we need to do? How do we go about doing it? If that initial resource was there and that conversation could occur, we might not be in the position we're in now. I honestly think you have well-meaning people in communities wanting to do the best. And I understand we call them the lime green pants. They come from out of state and they want to live in Maine, but bring their Boston-like standards to Maine. We get it. There's such a disconnect when that happens. So we fully appreciate those undertones. But our real interest is protecting investment, protecting environment. And if there was a way to have those conversations at the state level, help us develop these plans, I think we'd all be on the same page. It's just, we need some help. And, adopting an ordinance is not inexpensive or easy. And so to just dismiss that process is also concerning. So again, I think communication, education, and figuring out what the real problems are will get us to, I think, a consensus outcome.
Thank you.
Paul, you got your hand up?
Yeah, just one more comment. And Kate, I appreciate the municipalities. I'm a select board member in New Gloucester. I serve on the select board. I've served on the budget committee. And I agree with you. If you take something, you expect something in return. And I, from a small town, I know what that's like to try to deal with all of that. But I'll also stand here on the other side of the equation for the landowner, as a landowner myself, and say that if the municipalities continue to take my ability to manage my forest and manage my land, I'm probably going to sell that land and subdivide it, because it's not worth me paying taxes on it if I can't cut it and manage it like I have or my family has for years. Now, so if the municipality continues to take from the landowner, there's got to be a response to that as well. So I just want to get that out there as well as a landowner and a forester. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Tom Doak.
Yeah, Kate, if I hope I didn't leave you the impression I think it's the big bad municipalities. So I don't see it that way. I really don't. It would be interesting to see, Patty. One piece of information I think might be helpful is does the right to farm law cause problems? And I'm not saying this is a perfect model for forestry, but is that causing problems for the department? Is that causing problems for municipalities? Is it, what is the result of that approach? Because there's some restrictions placed on municipalities there, and it'd be interesting to see if there's, is there good and bad with that? I know nothing about it, so I have no idea, but it would be interesting to see what the impact of that is on all the players.
So you suggesting maybe next meeting having someone from agriculture speak on that?
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to hear from municipalities if that. I don't want to undo the right to farm. I'm not trying to amend the right to farm law. I'm trying to learn from other things that work well and don't work well for the farmer and the municipality. In that, is there a concept there that's useful? So I don't know what information is needed, but I think that might be helpful.
Thanks, Tom. Nancy.
Yeah, the other thing I was wondering about, sort of similar to, Tom wanting some background on the right to farm. The thing I was wondering about, I'm not very satisfied statements that intersect with forestry. So, DEP rules, shoreline zoning rules, and then the whatever ordinances there are that the Maine Forest Service enforces. And so I was wondering whether there was some way to have some sort of spreadsheet or table that sort of shows what some of those intersections are that might also be reflected in some of the municipal ordinances.
Yep, can do that.
Good idea. Thanks, Nancy. So good conversation. And oh, Dana, I see your hands up.
Thanks. So representing over 200 contractors in the state, who most of them have trucking operations, we obviously have, and I've surveyed our membership on this issue. So we've got a very long list of noise ordinances and harvesting limitations and other issues that have come forth from reaching out to our membership. And I certainly understand exactly where Kate is coming from, and I'm just going to provide an example of something that this group might want to hear from. So a couple of years ago, we had a process at the legislature through the Transportation Committee having to do with posted roads. And we clarified the state rules regarding the posting of roads and worked extensively with DOT and with Maine Municipal. And I would recommend that this group might want to take a look at what the Maine Department of Transportation does with respect to their outreach to the municipalities. So this is a recommendation. So Maine DOT actually has a local road center. Peter Coughlin is the director of that local road center and provides a lot of information, technical assistance, education, updates, maintains a database working with the municipalities on the posting of roads, when roads are frozen, et cetera, that has a software system that is there. I would recommend that that is a model that should be looked at by the Maine Forest Service. To Kate's point about having technical assistance, education, outreach, et cetera. We're not going to say that the world is perfect. I mean, we certainly, our members have tremendous frustration having to move from community to community and have a different set of rules that they have to operate every time they move. But I do want to just point this out, that that is what DOT has done, and there's significant resources at DOT for this. And it's something that I think this group should look at as a potential pathway moving forward. So I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of that.
Thanks, Dana. Do you think it would be helpful to have Peter Coughlin at the next meeting?
Potentially, I'd look for Kate's opinion and Maine Municipal's opinion on that as well. But certainly, I think there's a lot of experience there and investment from DOT that probably would be helpful to this group.
Thank you. Good suggestions. Any other input at this point? Okay, so I think what I'd like to do is have Dawn go through, and this is again so that we're all on the same page, go through Title 12, Section 8. So what is existing for working with municipalities on forestry issues?
Okay, thank you, Patty. So I sent out a copy of the law to you all, and I'm sure you all read it closely. I will walk through it section by section, but I just wanted to make a couple of overall comments. I agree with some of the commenters earlier that this is a very well-defined process in law. It's actually, yeah, quite a good piece of legislation, and when it's used, it works well. The issue is we often do not find out that a town is working on an ordinance until after it's been enacted, or they are already well down the road of trying to enact an ordinance. And if it's not too late, if the town is thinking about it, if we learn from somebody calling from town that they're working on an ordinance, we reach out to the town officials. We make them aware of the law and the process they need to follow. And we have not encountered any resistance from towns to do that. They follow the process, and the outcome is generally fine. The overarching issue is that we just don't know. I don't, there was a bit of publicity about this law when it was first enacted 20 some odd years ago. We worked with Jeff Herman, who was there at MMA at the time, to get the word out. But since that time, it's been pretty quiet. So that's the overall overarching thing is that we just don't know what's going on out there, and we have no way of finding out unless we hear from an affected landowner or a forester or a logger in the town. Any questions on the overall comment before I jump into the sections? Seeing none. Case, go ahead.
Just a question about that. What happens when an affected person contacts you and when the ordinance is unknown to you? What happens? What goes on after that?
Well, if the town is still in the process of working on an ordinance, we reach out to the local officials. We try to find out who's working on it. Is it the planning board? Is it the selectmen? Is it a local group of folks? But we reach out to the officials and we let them know that there's a process for adopting a local forestry ordinance. We are involved in that process, and we're there to help advise them on things. And as I said, when we've been able to be in contact with municipalities that are working on ordinances, generally the outcome's been pretty positive.
Right. I understand that part. What about when you're not aware of an ordinance and after the fact a logger, landowner, or forester comes to you? What happens then? Anything?
There's really nothing we can do at that point.
Any contact at all with the town or nothing?
Generally, we didn't start digging into this until just a couple of years ago and started finding examples of ordinances. And it's really been so long since some of these ordinances were enacted that it's out of our area of control.
Okay, thank you.
Paul Airy.
And Don, I think one good thing to comment on is from my time there doing enforcement was what happens if the municipality requests help with their ordinance from the Maine Forest Service that they've written, and what happens if their ordinance in several cases is written less strict than state standards.
Is that an observation?
What happens if they contact the Maine Forest Service for help with their ordinance?
Oh, if they do, and if the ordinance is not consistent with state requirements, say, for example, state law requires that property boundaries be marked if a harvest is taking place within 200 feet of the property boundary, and the town has an ordinance that says 500 feet. We try to point out those inconsistencies for them. Tom Doak.
Just a quick question, Don. Do you have a list of you must keep a list of the towns that have consulted with the Forest Service, right?
Yes, it's a short list, but yeah, we do.
That would be helpful to just have that, because that would be helpful to just know, because you have to keep track of those anyway, right?
Well, we do, but as I said, we're not aware. If town enacts an ordinance and they don't follow the process, we're not necessarily made aware of the fact that they have an ordinance. So we have not maintained a registry. But I hear what you're saying, and I can get that list together. Paul.
Sorry, Don. One follow-up.
Yep.
Enforcement of municipal standards. Can you help at all? Can you give technical assistance?
It's been our policy for years, decades, that a town that enacts a local ordinance is on its own for enforcement of that ordinance. Okay, I'm just going to run through the law by section real quick because for most of the sections there are no issues. A licensed professional forester must participate in development or amendment of the ordinance. We've had no issues there. That language is clear. B, a meeting needs to take place between representatives of the department, meaning us, and municipal officials involved in developing the ordinance. And then we have a discussion about what their goals are and how we can help them achieve their goals. Again, that's to us, that's very clear. The municipality shall hold a public hearing. No issues there. Required notice to landowners, no issues there. Filing certification for the ordinance or that the ordinance has been mailed to the landowners, no issues there. We get down to the final paragraph of section C, subsection C of the law. It says any action challenging the validity of the adoption or amendment of a municipal timber harvesting ordinance based on the municipality's alleged failure to comply with the landowner notice requirement must be brought in Superior Court within 90 days after adoption of the ordinance or amendment. So That seems pretty clear. I'll just note that that does impose a potentially significant burden on a landowner to fight the town in court. But that's, that's not for us to, or for the Maine Forest Service to deal with. D, municipal clerk shall notify the department of the time, place, and date of the hearing. We've had no issues there. That's clear. At the public hearing, representatives of the department should be given an opportunity to present and discuss the issues that are at stake here. Again, that's pretty clear language. The F, municipal timber harvesting ordinances may not be unreasonable, arbitrary, or capricious, and must employ means appropriate to the protection of public health, safety, and welfare. That's very clear. And it, again, to assert that the municipality acted otherwise would need to be decided by a court. Direct costs incurred by a municipality associated with landowner notification requirements must be paid to the municipality in accordance with the distribution schedule, blah, blah, blah. We've never had to deal with this. I recall back 20 some odd years ago, there was a town that contacted us about this and we told them what the process was, but there was never any follow-up. So this piece of the law is, I'm not an attorney. It's not clear to me who pays because the legislature does not appropriate money for these purposes. But it goes back to that mandate issue. 9, centralized listing of municipal ordinances. The Bureau shall maintain for informational purposes a statewide centralized listing of municipal ordinances that specifically apply to forest practices. And so this gets back to my overarching point is that we're rarely notified of the existence of such ordinances, and we rarely receive copies of these ordinances when they are enacted. So we have not maintained this list. We did develop a list of known ordinances in preparation for the hearing on LD 1407, but it's incomplete and it's a work in progress, and information is still coming in from folks in the field. But it basically, requires us to check in with every municipality about whether they have an ordinance, and it can be, it depends on how you frame the question, whether the answer is interpreted correctly. But we're building the list. It's let's see, it's easily got close to a couple of dozen now. The list I sent you has been augmented since I sent that out. Would you like me to go through any examples? Just briefly? I've got a few. Okay, I just picked out a few. This is not to single out any particular town. It just that these stood out as some common occurrences out there. There's one town that requires a permit from the code enforcement officer to harvest timber. The only requirements in the town's the only requirement in the town's ordinance is that harvesting comply with state law. The permit costs $10 an acre. So you're paying $10 an acre just for the privilege of harvesting timber in compliance with state law. There's another town that requires a permit from the code enforcement officer to harvest timber. The town requires a notification form that duplicates the Maine Forest Service harvest notification form, which information we do share with municipalities. And in it, they require best management practices for the protection of water quality. They are mandatory when these BMPs in general are voluntary measures, but the reference is to an outdated 1991 manual. That manual's been updated a few times since then. Another town defines clear cutting as any harvesting that removes more than 65% of the volume of trees. And no clear cutting is allowed. Requires a planning board permit to harvest timber in certain zones. Requires a road entrance permit. The property line marking requirement is less stringent than state law, and their definitions are inconsistent with state law. Another town requires 30-day advance notice to the town of harvesting, requires 15-day advance notice to abutters. They require a notification form as well, which duplicates the main Forest Service harvest notification. It allows the code enforcement officer to stop work if the abutters object to the harvest. And it allows additional restrictions on road use if the code enforcement officer determines it's necessary. And Jonathan Labonte, who was unable to be with us today, sent in an example from another town where they have some significant holding and they wanted to conduct a timber harvest, and the restrictions in the town's shoreline zoning ordinance were such that a lot of the acreage that they hold was, they could not harvest on it, or they could only harvest a small amount of wood. So those are some of the examples of what's going on out there. And, you know, as I said, it requires a careful read of each ordinance in order to pick out what the elements are.
And I just wanted to point out also that, you know, as we listen to these examples, we are talking about a lot of times a monetary burden on the landowner and or logger that has to be considered on this too. So this does have also a financial impact on some of these ordinance on the landowner and logger.
Tom Doak, and then Nancy.
Don, is there a definition of timber harvesting in that? Must be definition in that section of law, or is that one issue that needs to be discussed? It sounds to me like, you know, timber harvesting could be very broad, or it could be very, could be, this comprehensive look at. I'm wondering if part of the issue with some of the municipalities is, well, if they regulate shoreline zoning, it's not really timber harvesting in everywhere, so it doesn't count. Is it clear what constitutes timber harvesting, which then triggers the process, I guess?
Yeah, generally, in my read of the ordinances, the definition of timber harvesting is fully consistent or reasonably consistent with the state's definition.
Do you remember what that is? I don't.
It's basically cutting trees for the purpose of selling timber.
Okay.
I don't have it.
Yeah, that could be very broad. So when Paul used the example in this zone or that zone, a municipality might think, well, we don't have a townwide ordinance, but we restrict harvesting in this zone. So that would be subject to review potentially with a municipality might not think so. Is that that could be one of the problems? Anyway, I just throw that out. I don't know if it is or not.
Tom, I do know that many of other states, their definitions, I'd have to clarify what our definition is, but it's forestry activities were defined as forestry, forest practices, timber and tree harvesting, silviculture, or forest management. So it's certainly a broad look at it.
Nancy.
Yeah, just the sort of the unintended consequences. The example that Jonathan Labonte provided, I'm familiar with that one, and much of the stand within much of the timber within the shoreline zone is over plantation, that has no understory underneath it at all. And so the inability to get in and break up that stand and get a new cohort of merchantable timber and actually ecologically more sustainable timber, and encourage some ground cover would probably be more beneficial to the shoreline zone than prohibiting the timber harvesting altogether. So there are some unintended consequences of some of these ordinances. And it would be good if there were some processes that would allow for some exemptions.
Thank you. Paul.
Don, I think to Tom's point, a lot of what I work with the public and the municipalities is the clarification between timber harvesting, forest management, and change of land use. Two very different things. I think that's one thing that has to continue to be emphasized is change of land use is not forest management. It's not timber harvesting. It's taking land that was forested and making it something else that will no longer be forested. So we use the same tools to accomplish that mission, which is logging equipment, but it is not forest management and it is not timber harvesting. Timber harvesting is defined by the forest practices, the law, and that definition is typically used by the municipalities if you can get them to the point where they're working on ordinances and discussing ordinances. If you can get timber harvesting defined, they typically use the forest practices law, which is what I do with a lot of municipalities when I work with them. So I agree with what Tom said. It's just that the clarity of change of land use versus timber harvesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Patty. Oh, Heather's got her hand up.
Hi, sorry, I just wondered if maybe if a spreadsheet comes together, kind of summarizing what each of the existing ordinances does, the date in relation to the Forest Practices Act might be helpful, and maybe there should be a discussion about what to do when some of the ordinances have been on the books. I know you gave an example of one particular ordinance that referred to an outdated standard, but I do worry about communities that, many decades ago had worked hard on an ordinance, and I wouldn't want to see us ride roughshod over those thoughtful processes. So I just wonder if there's obviously you said that the list has been augmented since you first sent out the list. And some of those maybe are more recent ordinances, but things that maybe were on the books 25, 30 years ago maybe should be managed in a different way or considered in a different way.
Yep. And yeah, I agree with you. Because the only requirement on municipalities that had ordinances in place prior to 1999 was that they needed to amend their definitions to be consistent with state law. The one thing I'll point out is when I read the ordinances that are posted online, some of them do show the date of adoption, but they also show the dates of amendments. A lot of these towns have ordinances that are amended 5, 6 times, and unlike Maine law, where you can go to the website and go back and look at session law to see when a particular law was changed and how it changed, you don't have that same opportunity with municipal ordinances. they don't show the strike and replace. They don't say what was changed. It's, you just see the ordinance as it is. But I think, your point about those towns that had an ordinance from 25, 30 years ago is valid. Yeah.
I'm trying to raise my hand.
Oh, Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, at least in southern Maine, almost all of these towns have planners that assist the towns, mostly at the planning board level. And there must be some avenue to get some of these messages to them. And they're quite a bit more receptive and understanding, I think, of these rules. And it's just a suggestion as to how to maybe overcome this issue of information that's necessary for the towns to deal with these ordinances and others.
Thank you. Tom Doak.
Just Don, just a clarification. So
Yep.
I want to make sure I understand the statute. I think I helped write it, but I don't, that was a long time ago. If a municipality since 1999, if a municipality has adopted an amendment, an ordinance regulating timber harvest, or has amended it, they would have had to consult with the department, correct?
That is correct.
In order for them to have adopted it. So you could have this big mess of all those ordinances are not valid, or could be challenged, I guess.
I suppose.
Is that it?
Yeah. I don't know who would be challenging. I don't think we would be.
Well, yeah, there's the statute allows the landowner to challenge if they didn't get notice.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not suggesting that's the case. I'm just saying this looks like a mess. It's a bigger mess than I even thought it was. But it would be probably good to my earlier question about to get your list of those that you have consulted with. So those would probably, the rest of them probably are going to need something else, some follow up or something at some point to get at. And I never heard the example of $10 an acre. Did I hear $10 an acre for a permit?
You did, and I actually looked that up yesterday and saw the permit form, and it does say that.
So if I harvest on 100 acres, it costs me $1,000 to comply with state law.
As best I can tell.
Wow, that might be arbitrary and capricious, or at least unreasonable. Wow.
Well, let's see. Kate had her hand up, and then Paul.
Wow. Okay. And I wasn't suggesting we have to undo our ordinances. I was just trying to get a sense on what how big the issue is here. So.
Kate?
I think much of what I'm hearing would the issues that are being raised, very legitimate, would benefit from education and coordination with the department. The point that Nancy made with respect to making the environment healthier is something that no rational planning board or board of selectmen is going to say sorry. I mean, if you're going to, if there's the science that says, listen, if we go in and strategically do some harvesting, you're going to have a healthier water source, then that's the type of information municipalities need. And I think the outreach of saying, hey, you adopted your ordinances 20 years ago. Here's some updates. Here's what to look for. And I think that addresses a lot of what we're hearing. It's that education. I know nobody's blaming, but I just want to underscore the fact that these are well-intentioned people and ideas, and really trying to do the best for their communities and the state as a whole. So maybe I'm too Pollyanna on this, but I think that's key, that education, that communication, and working together, because your fiscal health is our fiscal health. So to the extent that you're allowed to continue to do your business, we thrive. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that we're like, anti-harvesting at all. We just need to find that sweet spot with respect to balancing interest and needs among all the interested parties.
Thank you. Paul?
Thank you, Kate. That as an elected official in a municipality, thank you for that. And I agree with you. But I will say, I agree with you. But I also stand in front of councils where members believe that a tree should never be cut in the municipality, and that belief. And I don't argue beliefs. I use science. I spent 21 years educating people about what we do for the environment, the benefits of what we do for the environment. I don't argue belief. If somebody believes a tree should never be cut, that's a belief. But it's made its way into the regulatory arena in some of the municipalities, and unfortunately, it just lacks the science behind it to understand. But I will say that the list that you all will get related to the municipal ordinances is just a touch of what is actually out there, a fraction. And I won't name municipals, but I got a whole list in my head. $1,000 building permit to clean up storm damage in one municipality, just to clean up storm damage from the wind blowing it down. $1,000 for a building permit for a small landowner with 20 acres. It makes no sense. It's a fire hazard. It's a mess. It should be cleaned up. $1,000 to clean it up. When you send that list on, there's a whole bunch of stuff that can be added to it, a lot more out there. Thank you.
Thanks. Kate? You're on mute, Kate.
I had nothing to offer. I didn't put my hand down, sorry.
Oh. Patty, we're closing in on the time we specified for a break. Do you want to take a break now, or do you want to keep plugging away? You're on mute.
See, I do it too, Kate. So I see we're at 10:18. So let's take a break till 10:30. Does that sound good? Get up,
Okay.
get another cup of coffee, get rejuvenated.
Thank you. We'll see you back here at 10:30, folks.
So I guess we'll get going. Welcome back. I really appreciate your input, and I think we're getting a direction going, a common theme for a direction. So that's a good thing. So we might, for the rest of the time, we might be done early, and that never hurts anybody's feelings, I don't think. We certainly want to be respectful of your time. But what I wanted to cover now is Dawn had sent out a short list of title areas where local ordinances can restrict timber harvesting operations. So just wanted to get input on this list. So on it now is at this point, we've talked about the forestry ordinances, time of day ordinances, noise, roads, permits, bonds, and time of year. Paul had brought up change of use, so development versus timber harvesting. Anything else to consider with this list that should be on the list? I know from personal experience, I did a harvest in Skowhegan a few years back, and the first day received 7 complaints because that feller buncher at 3:30 in the morning. certainly makes a lot of noise in the winter. So that, that easily could have turned into some potential ordinances. But anything else on that list, or that should be on the list to be considered?
Paul,
Patty, I like the idea. I don't know how it would work, but I like the idea. Sportsmen have the right to hunt and fish without being harassed if they're legally hunting and fishing in a legal way. I don't think logging contractors and foresters should be harassed when they're doing everything right on a wood lot as well. And case in point, I won't name the municipality, but on on 2 occasions in Southern Maine recently, the local PD has been my best friend from harassment. So I use the local police departments quite a bit to stop the harassment. I use them. In one occasion, my permits, my state and local permits were all stolen, and Save the Tree signs were put up all over the lot, and the local municipal police department was great help. There's not a lot they can do, Patty, other than a trespass order. Do you know what I mean in that situation? But I mean, I don't think we should have to put up with that harassment. Just saying.
So when you compare with hunting and fishing licenses, so how would you relate that to as a solution for harvesting harassment?
If we're doing everything legal, right? There's like a somebody hunting or fishing with a valid license. I have all my permits from the state and the local municipal, and we're doing our job. And people are walking onto the job with video cameras and videotaping you and filing complaints with every department they could possibly file complaints with. That's harassment. And that's more common theme now than it ever has been. So I don't think we should have to put up with that harassment. That's just my take on it. When we do everything right, and we do everything right, the municipality's on board, and then DEP's getting calls on us, and DOT's getting called, and everybody's getting called, that's harassment at that point. And that's not right when you're trying to do everything right.
Agreed.
Paul, I will look that one up.
Thank you, Don. And it's just, I will say this in that note, the local law enforcement in the municipalities where this has been an issue has been a great asset to use them and their expertise to stop it from happening. So thank you.
Greg Foster.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences that Paul has, and my day's been interrupted and messed up because I've had to address issues of people that are simply harassing my logging contractors or otherwise. So I echo Paul's sentiment.
Patty, may I jump out of my meeting manager role for 1 second?
Sure. Why don't we take Tom's comment first?
Yep.
No, I didn't. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I think the harassment, if I remember the hunting one was people would, the example I think was that someone's sitting in a duck blind and somebody is out, running around out in front of them with a boat so that nobody could, no ducks would be in, so you couldn't shoot any ducks, because you're spooking the game and things like that. I think that's Don. I think that's the. But I do have one to add to your list, Patty, and we've talked a little bit about it, but I think there may be a difference between a timber harvesting ordinance and a part of an ordinance that regulates timber harvesting. So I think we should not lose sight of the fact that it may not say this is the timber harvesting ordinance, but it may have a zone where I think it was Paul that said, a zone where timber harvesting isn't allowed. And that would theoretically be an ordinance, but not necessarily thought of as a timber harvesting ordinance.
Greg, you still have your hand up. Oh, okay, Heather.
I'm just, I mean, it's never fun to be harassed, and I guess I'm just trying to understand, like, where the law, you know, doesn't help, and or where the law could be strengthened. Because I think, I mean, some people might call civil disobedience harassment. Some people who engage in civil disobedience intend to be arrested to call attention to something. So I guess I'm just not sure what would help, Paul. Like, what, you know, you've experienced harassment, or what you think is harassment, but trespassing is the law that the police department can point to stop that behavior. I'm not sure what else you could, like, are you asking for like a harassment law, like a new law around harassment, or a definition of harassment to be defined? Just not sure where what new needs to be done, I guess.
Sure, no, and I would never infringe on anybody's right to protest, even in the roadway or anything like that.
Mhm.
Heather, it gets to the point where it's actually really dangerous. People running in front of the machines. I have actually had people jump up on the tracks of a fellow buncher while it's moving, and bang on the cab. So, and then I've had people running in front of the machine cutting to try to stop it from cutting, and it just continually progresses to get worse. And my loss of time is not my big concern. It's a matter of a safety issue as well. None of my contractors want to hurt anybody. They don't want anybody to get hurt. It becomes an issue when it escalates and escalates and escalates to where the point where that machine says on the side, stay back 500 feet. It says it for a reason. It's a safety reason. And I just, it continues to progress is where and there's not, you serve one person with a trespass order, 3 other people show up the next day. It just continues. And I don't know the answer. I'm concerned about the safety of this issue. And I don't want my contractors to ever be in a situation where they hurt somebody or potentially kill somebody with a machine. That's not what we want to be known for.
Don, did you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I actually have some personal experience with this matter, this kind of issue, dating back to a time when I was working with the code enforcement officer as a volunteer, and we had somebody confronting the log trucker with a baseball bat, saying, "Let's get it, I'm ready to get it on here." And another harvest more recently with somebody I know where people were trying to prevent the log trucker from coming in at like 6 o'clock in the morning. Um, it was a legal harvest, but the issue actually it grows because the people who go answer shopping, they call DEP, they call IF&W, they call the town, they call the Maine Forest Service, and they call their legislator, and we get dragged into what's essentially a legal harvest taking place. And there's really nothing we can do, but a lot of energy gets expended in responding to somebody's concern about the fact that they don't want a timber harvest taking place on the abutting property.
So what are we suggesting for an answer to that? That's the hard part, right?
Well, while we were talking, I looked up the law on hunter harassment, and I'll just summarize it. It says a person may not intentionally or knowingly interfere with the lawful hunting, fishing, or trapping of a wild animal, wild bird, or fish. And a person may not intentionally or knowingly disturb or attempt to disturb a wild animal, wild bird, or fish with the intent to interfere with hunting, fishing, or trapping. And then there are penalties for violations of that law.
Patty, I will say I don't have the answer. I just wanted it out on the list. I don't know what the answer is, but if you've been in that situation, I can tell you, especially working for yourself, when you're trying to work for yourself and make a paycheck and you're spending day after day of people jeopardizing their own safety to stop trees from being harvested on an abutting lot, it doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Pat, did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, it occurs to me, and some of my role with the SFI committee is to answer a hotline for concerns or complaints, and that can be on any harvest in the state. And to the extent it would deal with an issue like Paul's been describing, some of there's quite a bit of emotion there, so you might not be able to address it all, but we do deal with a fair amount of complaints where we're able to serve as a conduit of communication between the person who's concerned with an issue and those that are affected. And it doesn't always work, but a lot of times we're able to, once we're able to explain what's going on, and sometimes it can be something as simple as there's a timber harvest happening, in our backyard. Our kids are getting on the bus amongst pulp trucks and things like that. How long is this going to last? And when people understand the parameters or the time frame and that sort of thing, sometimes some of the anxiety goes away. But it's a function of communication. What the big problem I see from time to time is people come to these things fairly energized, and it's kind of difficult it's difficult for the active parties to deal with it directly, and sometimes it's helpful to have a third party to communicate with. So that's just been our experience. We don't get that many calls. We don't get as many as the Forest Service does, I'm sure, or other agencies, but there is something to be said for directing people who have complaints to somebody who can serve as an intermediary and try to act as a communicator.
I agree. Thank you for that. Yes, we in the Forest Service work with that all the time. And we have all our staff are mediators, essentially. And within the realm of forestry, we also, I think forestry has a bit of an image problem. And, there's certainly many ways we could try to improve that. That would possibly help with that too. But that gets down to capacity issues, of course. Okay.
Yeah, Nancy's got her hand up, and then Dana.
Yeah, it seems like there's sort of two scales to this issue. There's the scale of the person who doesn't like what's going on, and so they lodge a complaint with someone. And so that's something that can be mediated pretty well by getting the parties and conversations. And then there's the issue that Paul was referencing in terms of direct safety of the operator and the people who are trying to monkey wrench the equipment. And so that seems like a criminal issue versus a issue that can be mediated and needs a more direct response. And so I think there's sort of two scales of what the operators are trying to sort of deal with. So just wanted to, I don't know whether the criminal trespass laws are sufficient in terms of referencing forestry, and that we don't need to change those, but I do think there's like two scales to this.
Thank you. Dana?
One comment and one question. So just looking at this list, you have forestry ordinances, and then you've got roads with permits. So I have I apologize. In the forestry ordinances, you also have permits. So I just want to, for clarification. So we've had members who have reached out to me because they're required to get entrance permits to enter yards from either state or municipal roads. Is that included in one of those areas, or should that be called out separately?
It is included in, I consider that included in the roads bullet.
Under the roads permits?
Correct.
Okay, because there's,
Yep.
you know,
Yeah, I was just trying to be
things,
shorthanded there.
it's specific, because the bonds on roads is really a permit and a bond sometimes. And so these are separate and distinct. So I just want to make sure they're treated that way.
Yep.
And then secondly, comment to Patty's point, you know, we have a perception and an image issue that needs further education and understanding. So part of whatever may come out of this group is image promotion and education of the public on the practice of not only forestry, but timber harvesting. And that is a role that I think the state needs to take a stronger position on, to educate more folks on what people are doing and how it's part of, it's no different than agriculture. We do a great job advocating for farmers. We don't do a great job advocating for forestry professionals.
It's a fair comparison, absolutely, and I agree.
Paul, you got your hand up.
Just a quick comment, Patty. I totally agree. You and I have had long conversations about advocating for what we do, I mean, the Forest Service that's their mission, really, and we spent years doing that, talking about trying to educate the public, educate tax assessors, planners, you know, all of them about the benefits of active forest management in the community. And I agree with all of those comments. But really what I'm looking for out of this committee is, that's one side set of what we're doing, you know, that you're always going to do, and capacity is always going to be an issue. I hate to say it, but at the state level, capacity is always going to be an issue to educational outreach. Because I was one of those district foresters and I covered 3 counties as a district forester. So that's always going to be an issue. And I agree with that. But on the other side of this, we need to make it easier for our landowners to keep their land and want to manage it. And me and Greg to be able to do our job, and the logging contractors to be able to do their job. And that's really what I'm looking for here. I don't disagree with the educational issue. I think it's huge. And you know me, Patty, I spend a lot of time educating municipalities. But I'm really looking for more of, how do we make this so people are being educated, but also understand that we're doing a good thing. Thank you.
Yeah, Paul, I mean, one of the, one of the questions that would be great to hone in on more is, what can we do to make this group here, to make this a successful effort to preserve the working forest heritage, and that's everybody involved. And so, yeah, I hope, as we go through these meetings, we hone in on the issues and get closer to a solution, I guess. That's what you guys are here for.
Heather.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate that there's the concern about, the protection and landowners' right to manage their land in the way they choose, and also the need for more education. I participate in Board of Pesticides Control meetings regularly, and MOFGA has attended just almost every single Board of Pesticide Control meeting for decades. And I guess I would just say that a similar conversation has evolved over the years about the need to educate the public about the benefits of pesticides and the necessary use of pesticides. And the emphasis on that does not mollify people who are concerned about poor practices or poor management practices or unnecessary uses of chemicals. It only inflames and fans the fires of concern. And so I guess the reason I'm saying that is I fully understand what you're saying. I totally hear you about the need for education, but I also think it goes both ways. And you know, I do spend a lot of time on you know, agricultural issues and trying to minimize reliance on agrochemicals, and trying to help people understand you know, more environmentally healthy approaches. I don't spend a lot of time on forestry, although we do have a low impact forestry program at MOFGA. But I guess I'm just saying that I think that if what comes out of this is like, you know, we're protecting our right, or landowners and consulting foresters are protecting their right to follow the Forest Practices Act, or outcome-based forestry only, and not thinking about the concerns and continually striving for improving practices, then the problem is not going to be solved. It's only going to anger people. And I guess it might be helpful. I mean, I haven't worked on a forest ordinance. I don't know if maybe that maybe there is a group that worked on a particular forest ordinance in a town that should be attending this stakeholder group who could bring that perspective. But I just thought it's just sort of a caution, because it will just go on ad nauseum and we'll never get to understanding or really hearing each other.
So Heather, are you suggesting then that, because we've had a couple of folks suggested to be at the next meeting, so are you suggesting finding someone who's gone through the process for the town to speak about it?
I think that could be really helpful. And maybe folks who have that that vision of how they would like to see forest management practices changed in general. Okay. I mean, I clearly, you heard me at different hearings this past legislative session, and our focus really was on trying to stop the aerial spraying of herbicides and for plantation forestry. But but I mean, I think that there've got to be other organizations that are focusing on some of these specific issues that you've listed that need to be addressed.
If you have suggestions, would you send those in?
Yeah, I'll do some digging, and I'll should I send that to you, Patty, or
probably to Dawn?
To Dawn. Okay. I'll see what I can find. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but there's somebody on this call who actually very recently participated in the development and actually the repeal of a local ordinance of forestry. I'm looking at you down in New Gloucester.
I don't know what you're talking about, Don. And what I will say is, Patty, I would offer that same. You've met the managers at Falmouth. You've personally been on their land. I would say Amanda,
Okay.
Would be a great invite. Even Cumberland, any of those groups over there at Cumberland. Yeah, I mean, I can talk with you about all the work we've done in Sweden too, if we get to that point. But yeah, I mean, you've personally been on some of the Falmouth concerns in Falmouth, so that group would be a great group for you to maybe invite.
Okay.
Okay, Pat Strauch had his hand up and then Nancy.
Yeah, I guess I was responding a little to what Heather was saying. I'd like to know more about the agricultural, the reasons for that. My sense is it involved manure, pesticides, kind of a difference of policy opinions, and so the rule was put in place so that those debates could occur in the legislature, but not on the ground where people were trying to have their businesses. And so I'd be interested in knowing more about the history of the agricultural ordinance and the issues that led to that. This is about foresters and loggers being able to go on with their daily activities. And if we want to make changes to the law, that's a legislative function that we all know how to participate that way and have those big policy debates. But this is clearing the way for people who are abiding by the laws and the policies that are in place to move forward without hindrance. And that's how we ought to take a look at this. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Pat.
Patrick. Nancy.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to add, I don't think it doesn't necessarily relate to what the question is on the floor right now, but you know, one of the things that I would also throw out there in terms of how we look at our ordinances and the implementation of forestry is that, you know, we need to be looking at climate resilience, you know, making sure that we have a forest that's diverse enough and resilient enough to be able to withstand the changes in climate that we're seeing. And then the other thing is the forest pests and pathogens issue that, you know, we have to be able to respond to some of the pests and pathogens. And I would even say invasive plant species. So I think these, you know, laws and rules need to be flexible enough to be able to allow the forest managers to be able to respond to those issues.
Paul?
Thank you, Nancy. I just want to echo that because I just worked with a municipality that had an anti-herbicide policy in the municipality, and they actually had a tremendous invasive species problem. And so addressing the invasive species without the use of that was near impossible. It just took a while to educate them on that, but I deal with municipalities. A lot of the work that I deal with in southern Maine with the municipalities is related to invasive species. I will say this, I've been spending a lot of time in the Denmark, Otisfield, Freiburg, Conway area recently, and the amount of egg masses from gypsy moth concern me for next year. I don't know if you're seeing that, Nancy, but I have never seen so many gypsy moth egg masses. So, you know, I'm not looking forward to next year, but these are things that landowners need to have the option to be able to handle.
We're seeing huge infestations up near Millinocket, which, you know, the gypsy moth, which I've never seen before. It was crazy.
Okay. I just want to echo what Nancy said. It's those abilities as managers that we lose that to maintain a forest.
Heather?
Thanks. I think you said at the outset that this particular stakeholder group was not going to be addressing pesticides, but I just want to, I mean, that you said that there's not in the purview of the forest department. It's the Board of Pesticide Control, which I think is accurate. The other thing is just on invasive species and climate change. The climate is changing, and there is a change in species distribution. Chemicals are not going to reverse the course of our changing climate. And so I just want to note that chemicals are not necessarily going to be the antidote for invasives. And the definition of invasives is a tricky one as well. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so I think at this point, I'd like to, Dawn, you've been taking notes about our homework. If you could review what our homework is for the next meeting, and then if anyone has anything to add to that.
Yep. First, I'm going to give a homework assignment to the group. And that is, if you are aware of local ordinances that restrict forestry as we define it, to, you know, timber harvesting, the time of day, the noise, the roads, where people conflate development or change of land use with timber harvesting, please send us those examples. If you can send us a link to an ordinance that's posted online, that would be great. I know that some towns don't have their ordinances online, and that's okay. But if we can just get some more examples to help us do our work, that would be outstanding. As far as our to-do list, I've been trying to keep a list going here, and in no particular order. It's an updated list of the existing ordinances, a list of the towns that have consulted with Maine Forest Service in the development of their ordinances, looking into the possibility of a presentation from DOT on their local roads program, the possibility of a presentation from somebody from the department on the right to farm law and how that's working. I think we've addressed the issue of pre-1999 versus post-1999 ordinances. But Heather, if you want to get back to me on that, we can deal with it. I've already looked up the hunter harassment law, which I'll send that around to folks. Nancy asked for a spreadsheet showing the how the different state laws and rules interact with respect to timber harvesting. Can certainly do that. And then look into the possibility of getting a town that's gone through the process to speak to the group about it. Did I miss anything? Kate?
Just to add on to the right to farm, I thought there was also a suggestion we figure out the municipal experiences with the right to farm, problems, what works well, and to the extent that we're able to, we're happy to send out an email to our officials to see if they have anything to share with that respect.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if you said this or not, maybe Heather's suggestion of someone who's gone through the process with their town, and then Paul had suggested Falmouth or Cumberland representative.
Yes. Yep.
So anything else for to-dos for us of what would be helpful for next time? Okay. Anything else in general before we go for folks who are observing might want to comment? Anything else for comments from the group? Okay.
Paul's got his hand up.
Paul?
I just want to say thank you, Patty, Dawn, and thank you everybody for being a part of this. I know I'm really excited about what's going to come out of this. You know me, I'm passionate about education and what I do, Patty, and I think there's, I think this could have a huge benefit to the forest in Maine and keeping forest land forested. That's our goal, is to keep forest land forested. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yes, agreed. Thank you all. Yeah, I see we're going in a good direction and look forward to what comes out of it.
So Patty, I have enabled the mic and the camera for the folks who are not part of the group for public comment. If anybody's out there who wants to offer comments on today's meeting, please raise your hand. Eliza Townsend.
Hi, thanks for your good work. I'm Eliza Townsend. I'm with the Appalachian Mountain Club. I have enjoyed listening this morning. And I just wanted to say that I thought that a lot of what has been discussed comes down to communication. And I wonder if there is not an opportunity for the Maine Forest Service and the Maine Municipal Association to partner in communicating with local communities. Perhaps it's time, 21 years or 22 years after the statute was written, to see where we stand and start with just gathering the information about who has ordinances and what they say. And that seems like, especially in the email era, pretty doable and pretty inexpensive.
Thanks, Eliza.
Sure, thanks.
Nancy.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick that there is a model for that. If you look at the initial outreach that Beginning with Habitat did to the towns. And so there might be a model similar to what Beginning with Habitat did in terms of doing a sort of a road show as part of Maine Forest Service efforts. I know it takes a lot of work, but it might be a good model.
Good idea. Thanks. Anybody else?
Pat Royce. You're muted, Pat.
It occurred to me as I listened to some of the comments and I was thinking about them that I'm not saying that folks on this call are thinking this way, but I think we're maybe ignoring the fact that forest practices have improved dramatically over the last 25, 30 years. And I know there's a great deal more care taken in the planting and the harvesting and everything from dealing with aesthetics to communications, and it's not perfect. That's for sure, but things have improved dramatically over the years. And I think part of this exercise is to make sure we guard up against the notion that there's this massive deficit in the way harvesting and forest management is occurring in these areas. And I don't think there is. I think there's a lot of concern by the public on what they see and what they hear. And I understand this. They're adverse to a certain amount of change, and particularly with mechanization today, we can make a lot of change happen quickly. So there's change, and then there's the rate of change. And so those things all play into people's emotions, but it doesn't mean there's not good work that's happening. And I think that comes back to this idea of communications. So.
Pat, is always good to end on a good positive note. Bob and Mary, I wasn't sure if you wanted to comment.
No, I think we're all set, Patty. Thank you very much. It's been very educational so that we understand some of the issues and concerns. So I thank you for that. And by the way, the documents that you provided were fantastic.
That was Dawn.
Thank you, Don.
Happy to help. Greg Foster.
Yeah, I just came to mind. I did not say who I represented. I am a consulting forester, but I'm also representing the Association of Consulting Foresters. My mistake.
Not a problem.
Did that.
Thank you. Well, good. Dawn, anything else?
No, that will do it. I will try to summarize the sense of the meeting and get that out to you as soon as possible. Our next meeting is on September 23rd at 9 o'clock. I think I got that right. And I will send you an invitation. We'll announce it shortly. Dana Duran has a hand up, and then Heather Spalding.
Just a request for our next meeting. So we have a large group of contractors that I think whose voice needs to be heard in this process because they are unfortunately, their activity, with all due respect to the consulting foresters here, it's the contractors who are the ones who are generally the targets of activity and the reasons why towns put ordinances in place. So just do us a favor. Can you get a notice out a little sooner with contact information that we can provide to our members rather than 15 hours ahead of a meeting so that we can have their participation in this process?
Yep. Can do.
Thank you.
Heather.
Thanks. I just wondered about the recording, and is that going to be publicly available as well, or is that just for, okay.
Yep.
And
If somebody asks for it, be happy to send it to them.
could you share the link with us, with our stakeholder group?
Yeah, I'll try to figure that out. I'm still learning this process, but.
Great, thank you.
Greg, is your hand up? Did you want to comment?
No, I didn't take it down.
Tom Doak's hand did go up.
Yeah, this completely unrelated, but Paul, before you cut, I need to talk with you about a completely different issue. So I'm going to give you a call on your cell in a couple, as soon as the meeting's over. Sorry I just wanted to try to catch you. That's all.
I make a motion, we adjourn. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.